Hi everyone and welcome. My name is Marla Cartwright. I'm a faculty developer for the Center for Teaching and Learning at Kaplan University Online. And today I will be talking with you all about discussion board strategies. Just to kind of get an idea of your personal kind of situations in terms of if you're teaching online, if you're teaching on ground, or teaching hybrid, what's your experience level and maybe comfort level maybe with discussion boards. How about we just kind of go around the room and you guys just pop in the chat, just let me know if you've taught with discussion boards. Okay, Maureen uses them. Barb and Sandy? Have you guys used discussion boards? All right, I see you guys are putting some info in the chat here. I like to make sure that I kind of tailor it to what the audience needs. Ooh, Barb says, my area of expertise, I like to think. Wonderful, wonderful. Please do share comments and suggestions in the chat box. That would be awesome. As in participate, not a teacher, but you work with them. Okay, Maureen, thanks. That is helpful. Welcome, Kiana. How are you? We are going to talk today about discussion board strategies. So let's go right ahead and jump into this topic. So you may ask yourself, why even use discussion boards? And there's a really good discussion that I found over at EDUCAUSE that gives 5 succinct reasons why. And probably most of you have heard of EDUCAUSE. It's a nonprofit that's focused on, quote, intelligent use of technology in higher education. And like I say, they go through 5 reasons why discussion boards are important. And this is really good for folks that are maybe teaching hybrid courses, teaching fully online courses, and maybe haven't ventured as much into discussion boards. Those of us who are more familiar with discussion boards, I think it's good to at least do a quick, touch base, a refresher about why we think they're really the heart of the classroom. So one main reason is that in both online and face-to-face environments, it's a crucial community building activity. I started my teaching career, I've been in online higher education for over a decade. I've been a full-time telecommuter for 2 decades. Prior to that, I also taught on ground. And when I used to teach on ground, I loved that community feeling of walking into a classroom and you've got 25 or 30 people sitting there. They're at different levels of interest, different levels of ability, but just being able to go in and capture their attention and communicate my topic to them. My background is teaching composition and literature, and to bring that to them was very exciting. And you could see kind of the light bulb turn on. They would start being engaged with the material. They would start being engaged with each other. And when I started my career in online education, I was thrilled to find that you could really replicate that kind of experience by using the discussion boards, because it's so crucial to build those connections. You don't want to just get up there and talk about your topic. You want to have your students care about your topic and value what you're talking about, so it's really meaningful for them. Sandy, I was in the wrong area. I used discussion boards extensively in my online courses. Okay, no worries. Glad you were able to pop back in. Welcome, Brad. We're just getting started. Come on in. We're talking about 5 reasons why that EDUCAUSE states discussion boards are important for the online classroom. So it helps us build community in the classroom. It's also important for the blended environment, because as you're seeing your students face-to-face, it gives you that extra avenue to contact them, either to push out content that you want to share, if you can do attachments on your discussion boards. You can also preview material, introduce material, let's say on the front end of your academic week by sharing it on the discussion board, and then following up when you see your students face-to-face. So does anybody here use discussion boards in a blended environment, or is everybody here pretty much online only? Okay, Brad's online. Sandy uses it in both environments. Kiana says I do, and Barb uses it online only. Okay, cool. Welcome, Sarah. Come on in. We're just getting started. We're talking about discussion boards, and we're starting out with 5 reasons why discussion boards are important to the online and learning environment as reported by EDUCAUSE. So the third reason that they're important is because, like I just illustrated, it can really facilitate your discussion beyond the face-to-face. And I don't know about you guys, but when I used to teach face-to-face, I watched the clock like a hawk because you know the students are. And it was always so hard to fit in, you know, for 50 minutes, for, you know, 45 minutes, for an hour, to really fit in all the things that I wanted to do, because I wanted to introduce maybe the writing process to them. Then I wanted to have them practice an aspect of the writing process. I wanted to demonstrate it to them, and I just found that really difficult to fit in. And so the discussion boards can provide that extra avenue, so you can maybe start something face-to-face and then use discussion boards on the back end and say, well, we'll continue this discussion, meet me on the boards, and you can extend that. And because it's asynchronous, they can meet you anytime, anywhere to continue that good back and forth. So discussion boards can also engage students in a course content continuously throughout the course. So another thing that I really love about boards is that students don't leave a topic behind at the end of week 2 or the end of week 4. If your discussion boards are available throughout the entire term, they can go back and forth and go back and revisit those topics, which is really great, because that's one advantage of the many advantages it has over face-to-face communication, because unless the students are taking notes, they're really not going to have a good handle about what you discussed 2 weeks ago, what you discussed 3 weeks ago. But in online, it's text-based, it's all captured, it's all archived, and they can go back and review that if they need to. And then the final reason that EDUCAUSE gives us is that, and I love this quote, learning is not a spectator sport. Students must talk about what they're learning, they must write about it, they must relate it to past experiences, and they must apply it to their daily lives. So they have to take those nuggets of information that we're sharing with them, but they have to wrap their hands around it. They have to really digest it and reform it and find applications. To make it really meaningful, to make it knowledge and understanding that they walk away with, you know, past the end of the semester, the end of the term. So now that we've discussed 5 reasons why discussion boards are important, and I'm probably preaching to the choir because it seems like everybody here uses discussion boards, I'm going to shift the focus now to talk about best practices. So 3 best practices for having effective discussion boards include instructor presence, providing effective feedback, and planning for scenarios. So we'll discuss each one of these in turn. Barb says discussions are the most important component of any course designed with a social constructivist environment. That's absolutely right. It becomes that student-centered environment instead of the teacher-centered environment. So one of the best practices for an effective discussion board is, of course, instructor presence. And that not only means that you post to your discussion board often throughout your academic week, but you really should post to your discussion board first. Even before units open, if you're in a setup where certain units or certain modular sections open up according to a schedule, you can still go in and pre-post. I always like to, quote-unquote, feed my discussion boards by putting that very first introductory post, because that lets my students know that I'm there, that I'm available, that I'm guiding their learning. It's also an opportunity to personalize those discussion boards, to really, you know, especially now. I remember when I first started, again, a decade ago, it was pretty much all text-based. And now a lot of the newer platforms give you the ability to have a profile image. You can have a thumbnail. And that really personalizes that discussion board space because they can see your face right next to the comments that you're sharing. Barb says all three of these relate to facilitation. The facilitation of the discussion board, yes. Absolutely. And we'll talk about some scenarios where discussion boards sometimes can run off the rails and some ways that you can, some techniques to kind of help get things back on track. So Instructor Presence gives you the opportunity to personalize the classroom space. It helps you to establish the tone. One of the reasons I like to be the very first person to post on a discussion board is because I like to use a salutation. Of course, I'm using full sentences, a capital letter, ending punctuation. I'm using good grammar. I like to use an ending. You know, I'll sign off. Even though my name is tagged on the post, it gives it the format of having a little more formal communication. It looks a little more like a memo and less like a text message. And if you want your students to respond that way in class, it's important for us as instructors to establish that tone, to set the model for them. Oh, Barb says, thanks for clarifying. I often think about the design of the boards. I'm an instructional designer. And Barb, again, feel free to chime in and offer suggestions and comments as well. I think probably all of us, to a certain extent, are a little bit of an instructional designer. Again, I started out as a composition instructor, professor, and now I find myself doing much more instructional design type work, creating things in Camtasia, in Storyline, and that sort of thing, or different platforms. The Instructor Presence also helps to build a community within the classroom because if you've ever seen an online classroom where the Instructor Presence was not there, it soon becomes this dark and dank kind of place where students get to be less and less likely to participate. They're a little bit timid. They could be a little self-conscious or shy about being the very first one to post. And so if you're the first one to post, that alleviates that immediately because then they can read your post and say, oh, okay, this is kind of what she's looking for. Oh, Nikki says, how long is a post too long or too short? Well, Nikki, I'm going to say that that really depends on several factors. Number one, it depends on your student population. Are you teaching a first-term course or a graduate course? And it's going to depend also on your content, your subject matter. Are you teaching, you know, a how to write course, a composition course? Or is it something that's going to be much more in-depth, like maybe a legal studies course where you would want to have you know, citations, you're going to have a lot of research, you may be showing them how to do something in a particular structured kind of way. It really depends, and I think you need to kind of gauge that by, you know, by your audience, purpose and audience, right? Okay, for graduate level courses, I would say you could go a little more in depth. And two, you can kind of take as a guide the prompts that are on the discussion boards. If you teach a course that already has that pre-populated, and they're asking the students to do maybe multi-step kind of tasks on the discussion board, then that's probably going to necessitate that they spend, you know, 2 to 3, 4 or more paragraphs to fully satisfy all the parameters for that topic. Exactly, Brad. Yes, you shouldn't dominate the discussion, and when we get to the scenarios, I'll illustrate that, because you can be too present in the course, right? You can, if you respond to every posting, then the students may just kick back and say, well, we don't have to talk to each other because the teacher's going to come in here and tell us what you know, if we're on track or if we're not on track. I find that the best place, probably a best practice where you need to go in and respond to every post is going to be in introductions. That week 1 introduction discussion board where everybody shares, you know, what they're studying, where they're located, how long they've been in school, all those kinds of things. They really need that one-on-one feedback. And then after that, of course, you want to think about stepping it back. So that is Instructor Presence. And of course, that depends on posting consistently throughout the week and consistently throughout the term. Think of how frustrating it must be for students to have a super active instructor, let's say during week 1, week 2, week 3, get to midterms, and they start to peter off a little bit. So make sure that that's consistent throughout the term. And we've already talked about how it's an opportunity to further that discussion that started in the face-to-face classroom. Yes, exactly, Kiana. It reiterates the interaction and engagement in the discussion. You're having the same discussion. It's just a different platform to extend that discussion. Barb says, I have some research that suggests more words are helpful only when students do not or rarely cite sources. And I'm going to guess that that's probably because it cuts down on students just replying right off the cuff. But I have to say, as an English professor, I'm going to cringe a little bit about the idea about not citing the sources. Again, it's going to depend on what level of student you're teaching, where they are in their academic career, and your course content. So another best practice is going to be sandwich feedback. And does everybody know about sandwich feedback? You can give me a check mark or hands. Okay, Dave doesn't know about sandwich feedback. Sandwich feedback is basically where you craft your feedback so that you start with a positive reinforcement. You put that constructive feedback for the student in the middle, and then you end with a note that encourages. And so you're telling the student what they need to do better next time, but you're couching it so that they're much more prone to listen to it and to integrate it and to really act on it for the next time. So I like to begin with personalized feedback. So I'll say, you know, hello, Susan, you did a really nice job responding to your classmates. So maybe they responded back to a classmate. But maybe she missed one of the 3 main points she was supposed to talk about in that discussion board. So that would go in the center, in the middle of my feedback back to her. And then at the end, I might end with a note, something like, you know, I really look forward to what you have to share on the discussion board for week 3. Keep up the good work. Those kinds of things so that they know you're paying attention, you're actively involved in the class, you're giving them feedback so they know what to do better for next time, but that's not the only thing that they hear. So sandwich feedback is another best practice. And then planning for scenarios. And I really like to stress this because if you can kind of mentally go through typical discussion board scenarios and plan ahead for them, number one, you'll be able to respond much more quickly because you'll be able to identify what's going on. And it will help you kind of retain kind of control over what's going on in the classroom rather than have a situation come up and then kind of have to spend time, oh gosh, so what should I do here? It's just going to take you longer to respond. And as you know, the longer you let a discussion board kind of scenario go on that could easily get off track, it's just going to get worse. Of course, the worst example is a flame war, and you want to avoid those at all costs. But there's other ways that discussion boards can be less effective for both you and for the students. So before we talk about the scenarios, are there any questions about the sandwich feedback or the instructor presence? Nikki says, how often should the post be graded? Per week, every 3 units? Well, Nikki, that's going to depend on the instructor expectations for your particular institution. I would say that general best practice is that they should be graded at least once per week. And that's so students know, again, how they can improve for the next time. If they don't get that feedback, but maybe once or twice a term, it's going to be really hard for them to implement it. Dave, I have not. Dave says, have you ever seen flame wars if the instructor has a presence in the class? And no, I have not. And that's because if the students know that there's, you know, a guiding kind of hand in the classroom, number one, I think they're less prone to let it go to that level. And two, if we're in the class, you know, often, every day, every other day, then you can kind of head off those kinds of things and divert, refocus students that may be, you know, headed toward that kind of thing. Yes, Sandy, good point. Sandy says there are also rubrics for grading the post, too. Always go by the rubrics that are provided for you either within the class, provided by your academic leadership, or rubrics that you have to construct yourself. All right, so let's talk about different scenarios, and this is my favorite part. I love to talk about different scenarios. So one scenario is the slow discussion board. And that's why I have the snails in the bottom here, the slow discussion board. Oh, Brad says, a hidden goal of discussion boards should be to get students to lead discussions and to feel comfortable exchanging critical feedback. Exactly, and that's a key component to building that classroom community. They have to start to trust you as the instructor and trust each other, that they can have that kind of academic conversation with each other that's respectful, fact-based, non-emotional based, so that they can really take it to the next level in terms of, critical thinking skills. Yes, Barb, yes. If you have rubrics, it's a good idea to go over those with a fine-tooth comb with your students before they start posting, if possible. If there's a live synchronous component to your class. If there's not a live synchronous component to your class, another thing that you can do is to pull those rubrics out into the body of an email or as an attachment and email that out to your students and really call their attention to, make sure the basic expectation is, that you respond to the discussion board prompt and you reply to at least one of your classmates, and it's all done by midnight each Sunday, or whatever those expectations are. Really focus their attention on that. You can put it in the announcements as well. So for that slow discussion board with my little snails, that's going to be a discussion board that just can't get off the ground. You've probably seen these. You've got a good topic going. You think the students are really going to jump in, but it just goes nowhere. It fizzles. It's like a, July 4th firecracker. It just fizzles. Nothing happens. So some things that you can do for this is there may be some, you have to think about, so why aren't the students responding? It could be, number one, they don't understand the prompt. And I have seen some courses where the prompt is a little more elevated in maybe language and structure than what the students are able to really wrap their minds around. So that's where you as the instructor can really personalize that discussion board and break it down for them and say, okay, for this, think about reviewing this in the class or going to these pages in the textbook. Go through this kind of process to come up with an answer, or give them a sample answer. How would you respond to the post? Dave says, what if your class is small, under 5 students? Are you asking that in relation to having a really slow discussion board? Because it could be also a factor of their personalities. If you have 5 people who are really shy and quiet and reticent, they may just kick back and figure, they've posted, they're done. Or they're going to post at the very last minute, an hour before the deadline. You want to help them kind of break that habit, because they're not really having a discussion then, are they? They're just answering a question, like a chapter question in a textbook. They're not getting the most out of the discussion that they could. So you could, of course, make that first post, as we've discussed. That's a good best practice. You can also start a debate. You can call on students on the discussion board. You can say, Susan, what do you think about Jim's response over here? Jim, what do you think about Kate's response? And that can kind of start a conversation between the students. You can also provide your own reflection, your own thoughts about a topic. Students love to hear about scenarios. They love to hear about, situations that you've been in, and if it's related to the topic, then that's a great way to kind of jumpstart those kinds of conversations. And also be sure that you do a follow-up at the end of the academic week. So as you're providing that feedback, maybe the constructive feedback that you need to give the student is, I noticed that you posted to the discussion board and you had some really good critical thinking points in response to the prompts, but you posted Sunday at 10 p.m. And one of the main points of the discussion board is to talk with your classmates, and you're missing out on that opportunity. So that's another way that you can kind of get them involved and get them a little more up to speed on the discussion boards. Oh, I just scrolled down to the bottom of the chat. Let's see. Dave says, in flipped classes, I have also seen that it's difficult to get students to discuss online when they know we are meeting in class and can discuss in person. I think for that, a best practice would be to give them very specific things. So have some items that are designated as discussion on the discussion boards, and then some things that you're going to talk about when you meet face-to-face. So again, you could preview some information on the discussion board and say, be sure that you review these questions and provide feedback here, because when we meet face-to-face, we're going to pick the top 3 best responses. You see what I'm saying? It would be like a 2-step activity, and they have to do both to get the most out of it. No problem, Barb. Be sure to look at the recording. So those are some ways that you can help combat the slow discussion board. So another scenario is when the discussion topic runs off the rails. It gets off topic. Dave, you could, absolutely. You could bring the discussion board up in class if you're teaching in a web-enabled classroom, a technology-enabled classroom, and you could show those responses. You could read them aloud. Again, it's going to depend on how your class, what that classroom personality is like. And what topic you're discussing, whatever your subject matter might be. But yes, I think the more connections you can make back and forth, so then when you see them face-to-face, you could also say, be sure to go to the discussion board sometime this week, because I'm going to post some questions that you can only see there. See, and that way, you know, you're leading them to the discussion board. You want it to be a recursive kind of action, back and forth, back and forth. So for the scenario where the discussion gets off topic, it's helpful to restate the main idea. Again, maybe that prompt is a little bit too in-depth. Maybe it's a little too complex for the students, and so instead of, you know, discussing Robert Frost's poem, The Road Not Taken, they end up over here in a side conversation that's about, you know, who's winning on American Idol. And it's good that they're talking to each other, right? They're starting to form those bonds and creating community, but they're not answering the discussion question. You can go in and restate the main idea and say, hey guys, looks like we're having a great discussion about American Idol. And if you could pull it off, you can also, you know, make some sort of tangential connection. You could say, remember, all those contestants on American Idol are following a dream. They've chosen a path. Just like these are ideas that are discussed in the Robert Frost poem up for discussion, The Road Not Taken. You know, so if you could do that, that would be excellent. If it's completely separate, then gently remind the students that off-topic conversations need to happen in the cafe. Most online classroom spaces will have a discussion board that's only for casual chat, casual discussions. You do want to monitor that just to make sure everyone is still observing good etiquette, but it's ungraded. It's a way for them to maybe just chit-chat about their family, their moving, how their kids are doing in school, somebody who's just gotten out of the hospital, whatever those off-topic conversations, that can all go to a designated cyber cafe, a student cafe. You can also ask for interpretations of the original topic. So again, you can call on those students. So if you have a student who seems to be, you know, super on the ball and maybe is several steps maybe ahead of the other students in terms of how they're interacting with the material, you can kind of include them and say, gee, Daryl, what do you think about this? Or invite other people. Hey, Daryl says this about this week's discussion board topic. What do you guys think? And again, if you put their names in there, they're much more likely to respond and, you know, become part of that conversation. You can also ask someone in the group to refocus the discussion. So you could say, hey, Susan, it looks like everybody's gotten a little off topic or a little bit too excited talking about, you know, the basketball game, football game, whatever. how do you think you can, how can we make sure that we all stay back on track? You can also email a gentle reminder to everyone or to specific ones. You want to email maybe students that you see who aren't participating in the discussion board. There's lots of ways that you can address the entire class or address specific students individually. And also there are, I know, a couple of different discussion board platforms that have that the email functionality on the board, so you don't even have to leave the discussion board to send them a private message. So that's what you can do if a discussion gets off topic. Any ideas or suggestions in addition to what we talked about for the slow discussion board or the off topic, off the rails discussion? Okay, Dave says no, this is all good. I don't see any other chat comments coming through, so let's talk about what I call parallel play. And if you've ever seen a room full of 2-year-olds together and you give them a bunch of toys like blocks or dolls or cars or something to play with, they will pick up their favorite toys and they will go off and play by themselves. And I've seen this happen on discussion boards. I call it parallel play. A lot of times students are brand new to the online discussion boards. They may have the assumption in their mind that it's a private discussion between you and them. They're only going to talk to you because you're the teacher. And so these kinds of students, you have to help them understand that it's important to also talk to their classmates. They may not respond to their classmates at all. They're thinking maybe, well, the instructor is the one giving me the grade. That's really, and the instructor's the expert. That's really the only person I want to talk to. There's some techniques that you can use to kind of break out the discussion. So you can, again, you can acknowledge students who have similar ideas and then group them together. So let's say you have a discussion board prompt about talking about pre-writing steps. And you've got Jim over here who has posted and Susan over here who has posted. And they've come to pretty much the same kinds of conclusions. You can go in, let's say, on day 2 of your discussion board and say, Jim and Susan, you both did a great job in analyzing the pre-writing steps. I see you both agree that pre-writing is an important part of the writing process. See, that way you're going to get them together. They realize that they have similar ideas, and you can even follow up with a question. Jim and Susan, what else would you add to this? Why else is pre-writing important to crafting some good ideas before you get to the drafting stage? Or something like that. I think what happens in the parallel play scenarios is not only is the student assuming that they're having a one-on-one conversation with you, the instructor, and just with them. I think, too, that when they go to the discussion board, they only look at their own posts. They don't read through everybody else's posts. So again, you can set out perhaps some best practices and talk about these on the first day of class, again, either synchronously if you have that ability, or via an email or an announcement to the class, setting those parameters, reminding them of how they need to interact on the discussion board, and encourage them to scroll through and read, a lot of different postings on the discussion board. They don't have to respond to all of them, but they should read through them and remind them, if we were all sitting in a classroom together, you would automatically hear everybody else's responses to our topics. So give yourself that same opportunity by reading through the discussion board postings. And I think that will help greatly. Also think about ways to deepen the dialogue. Sometimes I've found that students are a little bit shy, they're a little bit nervous about how they need to interact on the discussion board, especially if they're students who are trying to be super conscientious. These are the ones who usually understand there's a big difference between texting their friends, chatting on Facebook, versus the classroom. And that's a good thing that they have a good handle on that. But they may be so nervous about not messing up that they kind of hold back in terms of when they post or how often they post to the discussion board. So try to make those good connections between the students and the content, and again, the students and the classmates. Help provide new perspectives on the material. Again, remember that all the material in the class comes through you. That's where your personality, your expertise, and your unique personality comes through. That makes the class come alive for the students. And of course, we want to honor multiple perspectives, and you want to find patterns among the students and explore common beliefs. So if there's a way that you can do maybe polling, you can ask for opinions on something, and that's another way that you can help students kind of see the connections that exist between them and their classmates. Another technique to kind of break up parallel play is what I call piggybacking. So this is where you respond to an original post and you amplify an aspect of it and you invite follow-up comments. So let's say a student has responded to a discussion board prompt and they've done a really good job, or one part of it is really on target. You could respond back to that student, say, hey, you know, Jones made a great point about how useful bubbling is when she's doing pre-writing. What other types of pre-writing do you all like to use aside from bubbling? So you're acknowledging that she's done a great job on her post, and then you're inviting those follow-up comments. It creates kind of a chain that connects the students' posts. And it does require that we as instructors visit those discussion boards on a regular basis, every other day, if not daily, because as the students post and you're starting these connections and these conversations, you want to make sure that you're responding back. So if the students respond back and say, well, you know, I tried bubbling, it doesn't work that great for me, I really like free writing. And then you can respond back and say, hey, so tell me some scenarios where you used free writing. Do you find that free writing works best on maybe more fact-based writing that you're doing versus more creative writing? Or does it work the other way for you? You know, really get them involved with the content. Ask them those probing questions. And again, like I mentioned, follow-up here is super, super important, because nothing's going to turn off those students more quickly than to realize that they don't have a responsive instructor. Another technique that can be really helpful is what's called weaving. And this is where you can identify unifying themes between students' postings. And you can just, you know, you can just pluck them out and say, Jack, John, and Juliet, all three did a great job with this week's topic. You know, and that way if they're scrolling through the post, they see their names, right? They've all decided that they prefer listing as their pre-writing technique. And some of the reasons that they like listing include, for them it's really quick, they like how they can order their ideas, it's easier for them to build an outline from a list, whatever those reasons are that they've shared. And you want to add positive reinforcing feedback, but that also gives you a chance maybe to point out any omissions or to make connections and weave student comments together. So for those three students, let's say, who liked listing, maybe we've got somebody over here. Maybe we've got Rick over here who doesn't like listing. Well, Rick, what do you think about their comments about listing? Have you ever tried listing as a pre-writing technique? If you have and it didn't work for you, maybe share with us a little bit about that experience. Did you get frustrated and try something else, or did you not even try listing whatsoever? And this way you can invite further comments, and it's nice to kind of summarize your ideas with bullet points, because that further encourages the students to go through and quickly read over your feedback and then to come back and post their own thoughts. So we've talked about weaving, we've talked about piggybacking, and we've talked about deepening the dialogue. So here's an example. So you could respond back with a question to a small group of students. Terry, Mark, and Susan, you all mentioned that you enjoy free writing as your favorite pre-writing technique. What do you all think are some reasons why free writing works so well? See how you're inviting them to come back. So they're not just posting and done and leaving. You're asking them some further probing questions. Are there writing situations where you use another type of pre-writing? So it gets them to think about, okay, I've used free writing, but maybe I should try something else. Or maybe I have tried it, but I found it to be really not that successful. You can also do a discussion board questions, where you can provide open-ended questions and provide resources for them as well. You can also invite them to relate questions back to their own experiences. So this is the flame war that we were talking about earlier. This is the heated exchange. So depending upon the discussion board topic, students can respond emotionally sometimes to, really polarizing issues. Here, I find that students post right off the cuff. They post without thinking. And they respond in a classroom situation as they would probably with friends, via texting, via Facebook. And so here's a good opportunity to reinforce the more formal nature of how we communicate in class versus the more informal way folks communicate on a friendly basis, in a social networking basis. So for the heated exchange, there's some strategies that you can follow. You can copy and paste the discussion board or take a screenshot for posts that you feel like are out of line. Maybe there's harmful wording in there, there's name calling, obscene language. Certainly you want to make sure that is off of your discussion board. But you want to capture what happened on the discussion board. Make sure that you have the student name and the timestamp are included in your capture. Then you want to remove the offensive post from the discussion board to discourage copycats or, just increasing that flame so that it ends up being a forest fire. And then, of course, you want to contact your academic leadership team for their next steps. Most universities are going to have very clear processes for you to follow. You may need to report it in some way. You may need to touch base with your department chair. Whatever that procedure is, you want to be sure to follow through on that. So to help avoid those heated exchanges, you can see the discussion again with the model post. And this is, again, where that instructor presence early on in each academic week is so, so important. And you want to remind students about those classroom ground rules, that they need to be professional and that you expect them to be respectful to each other when listening to each other's opinions. And we've already talked about that. So this is a scenario that I've seen happen, especially with pre-formed discussion board topics, where the instructor doesn't necessarily write his or her own discussion boards. It's already pre-formed in the class. It's preset. So if there are multiple topics presented, you can break them down for the student. You can kick it off, again, with that model post. You want to encourage discussion between the students, and then you want to coach students. So you could come back and say, I see that you've got a first good initial response to this discussion board question. I would love to see you come back and really explain why, fill in the blank. And that way the student won't feel overwhelmed, because if they just came to the discussion board and saw maybe 2 or 3 topics, they may be overwhelmed and say, you know what, I'm just going to skip discussion for this week. It's just not worth, the 10 points, the 20 points I'm assigned. It's too much to deal with. But if you break it down for them, even put it, number it in your posting, put bullet points, really show them, start out with this section and come back on Wednesday and post this, and come back on Friday and post this. really kind of coach them through the step-by-step process for tackling each one of those topics in a multiple topic discussion board. And that's pretty much all I have in terms of the scenarios. These are the references that I've used and my contact information, so feel free to contact me for any follow-up discussion you'd like to do about discussion boards, best practices for discussion boards. My email is mcartwright@kaplan.edu. And I appreciate everyone being here today. I hope you have a great rest of the day. And I will see you all in the later sessions. Thanks.